Welcome to another episode of Relics Radio. This is a family-friendly show, so the entire family can join us as we talk metal detecting, relic, and treasure hunting. You can also call into the show at 270-495-0315 or join in the chat and post any comments or questions you might have. Relics Radio is also now syndicated on the Cutting Edge Radio Network and is broadcast around the world. You're listening to Relics Radio of Southern Kentucky and Middle Tennessee. And you are listening to another episode of Relics Radio. I see the chat filling up. Got a lot of people in there. Tonight, we want to welcome them, everybody that is listening tonight live on the Spreaker app. But we also want to welcome all of our syndicated listeners on the Cutting Edge Radio Network. And we know that not everybody can listen live, so thank you for picking up the archive either here on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Apple Podcast, anywhere you get your podcast. That's where we are at, because we are the world-famous Relics Radio. And I am your host, Digging with Seven.
And I'm your co-host, Tennessee Jeff. How's it going, Seven?
Going good. I went back and reloaded the old Skype because all of the updates that they have, it's kind of like deja vu all over again, you know, because you remember whenever they used to update them, we never would update because it always messed everything up. And so I guess we're back in playing that game again. But I went back and it's working the way that it should, and so as long as we can, we'll just keep this version of Skype up so that we can add the calls as they come in. And you and I checked that earlier this afternoon, and it does work. So we're ready to go, ain't we?
Oh, we sure are. It works right now. So, but you never know. And then, of course, I think I've got all my internet problems fixed. But do have a little sinus cold, and little Avery, he's been sick all day. So it's been a little sickly around the Warwick household. So
well, temperature just up and down, you know, and it's very hard to kind of get used to it whenever it's, we have a stretch where it's real cold, and then we have a stretch where it's real warm. Of course, the days right now have been pretty warm, but today, you know, we had a pretty good breeze all day, and it was a little bit cool. But then it gets cold at night, you know, so situation that we're in, it's a change of seasons, and that's kind of what we used to always kind of want. I was a little bit disappointed this time, though, for summer to end, because I was diving as much as I was and everything, and I kind of hated for that period of time to end. I can't wait until everything warms back up, and I never thought I'd say that. Did you?
No, I didn't figure you'd say that, but yeah, I'm surprised you're not diving right now. So, I mean, I know you got all your tanks and everything that you needed, so I'm surprised you're not out there.
Well, I'll tell you the honest truth. I am thinking about going and working on some skills and everything tomorrow, but that's going to be in the pool, so it should be warm. But talking about divers, we have got a guy on here tonight as a guest that probably has more experience in diving than anybody that I know, and I'd say that we could probably put him right up there at the top of anybody in the country, wouldn't you?
I say we could. He's been doing it for a long, long time. So our guest is George Landgrabe. I probably tore his last name all to pieces. So how you doing, George?
I'm doing real good. How's yourself?
Doing good, doing good. Of course, like Seven said, the temperature's up and down here. I know we had the temperatures around 18 degrees a few days ago. Now it's back up to, I think the high today was 60 degrees, so, and the low is probably in the 30s or something like that, but it's a little cooler.
I'm talking to you, Florida, so we had a real cold day too. It went down almost to 50.
Yeah.
And
don't you worry about pronouncing my name. That was pretty good. 1 out of 10 is not bad.
Yeah, and for those of you that don't know, George is down in Orlando, Florida, and coming to us tonight live right here on the show. And so we kind of want to get a background on him, don't we, Jeff?
We sure do. George, what sparked your interest in diving? And then,
Well, as far as what sparked my interest, I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, okay? Mm-hmm. And my mother used to take us kids, my brother and I, down to the lake all the time, swimming and stuff like that. So I've always been kind of water-oriented, but not, to the point that I'm saying, well, gee, I want to dive someday, because when I was a kid, there wasn't any diving. Jacques Cousteau invented the aqualung in about 1943 in France. In fact, right under the nose of the Germans. And after the war, he brought it to the United States and really opened up a distribution center in California. So that's how soon actually the aqualung came to the States. And in California, because of the weather being the way it is and the access to the Pacific, it became very popular on the West Coast in the early 50s. And little was known in the Midwest in the mid-50s because we were kind of, I shouldn't say landlocked because we were right by Lake Erie. But because I was born in Cleveland, I just, didn't hear anything about it. Now, my family started shooting archery back, probably in the early 50s. And my dad, my mother, my brother, and I all shot archery. And then eventually just my dad and I carried it on. In fact, he was the treasurer of the Cleveland Archery Club. And we used to put on a demonstration at the Sportsman Show, they called it at that time, and I frankly don't even know if the Sportsman Show is still in existence. But it was held during the wintertime, and our club they had a little booth, and you could shoot 10 arrows for $1, and that was how we contributed to the show and also contributed a little bit to our treasury. Well, the one day I was there, across the aisle from our booth was a sporting goods store. And they had the aqualung sitting up on the counter. And I took a look at that, and I wandered over and started talking to the fellow about it. And he explained it to me and what it would do. And I always say that I crossed the aisle and I never went back. So I started taking the aqualung. I was going to college at that time in downtown Cleveland, and so I took the aqualung into the pool because I was also on the swimming team, and all the guys in the team tried it out, and I tried it out, stuff like that. And this was about I think it was about September, October, something like that, and I said, I'd like to take this thing in the lake. But at that time, you had no classes. There was no certification. You were kind of just saying, I'm going to strap this thing on my back and, wish myself luck. Well, I wasn't about to do that. So I started looking around town and found out that there was a small dive club called the Cleveland Skin Divers. And I might stop right here and say it was called the Cleveland Skin Divers, and what you usually associate skin diving is with free diving, in other words, just mask, fins, and snorkel. And that is how it was originally formed, but then the aqualung was known as scuba. Now, scuba today is an actual word, But back then, it was an abbreviation. It was spelled out like S periods, SC period, and it stood for self-contained underwater breathing apparatus. And so if you were a skin diver and you used this device, you were a skin diver using scuba. So I went to the club and I met the fellas there, and I was asking, how they all got together. Well, they told me that, and you might remember the movie The Fugitive. The Fugitive was based on a murder that took place on the west side of Cleveland. It was right on the edge of the lake. It was a very big home on the edge of the lake, and it was all about this one-armed man that supposedly broke into this fellow's house and killed his wife, and they felt like the murder weapon might have been tossed off of the shore into the lake. So they asked anybody that knew about diving, which are the fellows in this club, if they would come out and see if they could find the murder weapon. But they were unsuccessful, but they did all get together and form this club. So anyway, I came to the club meeting the one night, and I said, I bought this apparatus, and I did. I bought the tank, the regulator, I bought a knife, I bought a weight belt, and I bought a depth gauge, and it cost me a whole $150.
Wow.
That little thing today would probably cost you over $1,000. But anyway, that was back in 1956, too. So one of the fellows says, well, yeah, he said, we'll let you in the club, but you got to go through a test. And I said, fine. I said, what's that? He said, well, meet us at the swimming pool next week, and we'll put you through the examination. So I got there, and I had my equipment with me, and they put everything in my equipment down at the deep end of the pool, 10 feet of water. They put the mask, the fins, the snorkel, no snorkel, but the aqualung, and they said, okay, go down there and put it on and come to the surface with it. So I went down there, and the first thing you have to do is get air. So you turn the tank on, you get air, and then once you did that, you put your weight belt across your lap so it stayed on the bottom, and then you wiggled your way into the straps of the tank, and then put your mask on, and you had to clear your mask, which is done by just looking at the surface and exhaling through your nose, and then finishing off with your fins and coming up to the surface. And I did that, and I was a club member. So I said, okay, now what? I said, do we get to dive in the lake? They said, yeah, we're going out next week. You want to go? I said, of course. So I met them the next day, and we went out, and we were going to dive a wreck. And I said, well, that's great. I said, what is it? They said, the wreck is the name of the Kellyco. It was a oil barge that was being towed by a towboat, and it got into a storm, and the barge had no power. That's why it was being towed, but it had 1 million gallons of oil on it. And this was in 1943. And they said that during the storm, the guys on the barge looked at the tow line, and it was going straight down into the water. So they didn't know whether the tug, which can't take any waves over the back, might have cut it loose, because they're allowed to do that if they can't maneuver and allow the barge to throw out its anchors and just weather out the storm. Well, as it was, both the tug and the barge eventually went down, a total loss of life. So this barge was in 80 feet of water. And the top of it, which was actually the bottom because the barge rolled over when it went down and it landed upside down. And so that was our dive spot. And we all got dressed, and at that time, we had no wetsuits. We had no dry suits. We had long underwear. Because you would you would dress with something as close fitting as possible. Some guys wore sweaters over the underwear, and we were probably about 14 of us standing out there. We had a old trap netter fishing boat that just had the cabin up front, and the whole back was open. It was about 35 feet long. It was owned by one of the members, and there were about, like I say, about 15 of us getting ready to go down, and every once in a while a pleasure boat would go by, and we'd all stand there in our white wetsuits, waving at them, and they all thought we were nuts. But anyway, it kept us warm to a certain extent, because in Lake Erie, the warmest the surface temperature gets is 72 degrees, and that's in the middle of August. And so we started down, and I was with this fella, and he was actually holding my hand, and I wasn't embarrassed at all, because I kind of needed that kind of support at that time. Mm-hmm. And so we just kept descending and descending, and then at about 50 feet, we hit what's known as a thermocline. And this is where the temperature of the above water changes to the temperature of the bottom water. And you can actually see it in the water. It's like a wave that goes through it. And even though the top water was 72, the bottom water was 45. So all of a sudden, that close-fitting garment was more close than we could imagine. I mean, it was really cold. So anyway, we kept going down, just gritted our teeth, and we both landed on the bottom. And I'm looking out, and I turned to the fellow next to me, and I'm like, "Where's the wreck?" And he pointed behind me, and I turned around, and there was a steel wall going up right behind me. We had gone down along the side of the wreck, and I didn't notice it because we were looking out from the wreck. And I say to this day, I used a tank of air faster than I've ever used it before. Because that was a real experience. It was kind of like baptism by fire.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet.
Hey, guys, we need to take a commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about that wreck, and we're going to talk about what they found at that wreck, too. We are very excited to announce that Kellyco Metal Detectors is now the major sponsor of Relics Radio. Kellyco Metal Detectors has provided customers with the best metal detectors and accessories for over 60 years, and they offer the largest selection and best deals on metal detectors guaranteed. Kellyco Metal Detectors features only the very best of treasure hunting equipment that'll help you find coins, rings, jewelry, and relics both on land and underwater. From gold pans to metal detectors, they carry the hottest selling products on the market. And Kellyco is just a phone call away, before, during, or after the purchase. You can call them at 855-246-2586 or visit the website at www.kellycodetectors.com. And by the way, guys, we are affiliates with Kellyco Metal Detectors. Relics Radio is. And if you go and order anything there, be sure and put in the discount code Relics Radio. It's all one word. You'll get a discount on that, and we'll get a small commission on that. Hey, George, you were talking about this shipwreck here. Continue on with that, and tell us when you get down there and you really get started doing things. What did you guys find at that wreck?
Well, there really wasn't much you could do with it because of the fact that it was upside down. And we did when we were looking at the top of it, or which was the bottom of it, there was a hole about a foot in diameter in it, and it was actually blown out. Now, in reading some of the excerpts from the wreck, and since then, they've actually worked it to a certain extent to take the oil out. They claim a donkey boiler blew out, and that's what sunk the wreck, but it really doesn't look like that. It looks like it was actually blown out. And our thoughts were in 1943, when the war was on, that wreck might have been, sabotage. So we took a big light down and dropped it down in that whole opening and tried to find something and really couldn't do much with it. So it really didn't. It was a nice dive just to say, yeah, I saw it, but on to something else,
And this whole time you're down there in your long johns and the water is 40-something degrees. And I know you guys couldn't have stayed down there very long.
Well, no, you didn't. And there were two reasons you didn't. One was the cold, and the other one was we were using a 72 cubic foot tank at that time, as you're probably familiar with, the steel cylinder.
Right.
But we only filled them to the 2250 that was marked on the side. Nowadays, they've learned that they can go up to 3,000 pounds in it.
Right.
But people always said, well, aren't you afraid of decompression and stuff like that? Well, with a single tank like that at that pressure, you almost couldn't go deep enough or stay long enough before you'd start running out of air. And the other thing was we didn't have gauges on our tanks like they do today. So we really had no way of knowing how much air was left in the tank. And we did plan our dives with the Navy diving tables at that time, which were available because the Navy was using aqualungs before we were. And they made up diving tables that we would work, much like you probably, when you took your tests, you had to go through the Navy diving tables, like the no decompression tables and things like that.
Right.
So we used that back then. But people said, well, you didn't have any gauge to tell you when you're air. Well, how did you know you were running out of air? And I said, well, with a double hose regulator, which we were using at that time because that's all that was available. Now they're using single hose. But with a double hose regulator, when you had to start pulling the air out of the tank, you had 8 to 10 breaths left. And that's how we gauged it. And people said, you were nuts. I says, maybe, but we didn't know any better. And as you're coming up, your tank, the pressure comes off your tank, and you actually get some more air as you're coming up. So because you weren't staying there long enough, we didn't know anything about safety stops. They added safety stops in later on. But like I say, we weren't really down there long enough to warrant a safety stop, now that I think back over it. So anyway, that's basically, we did some other diving on some wrecks out there. We actually raised a big anchor, almost the size that you see on the side of these ore boats or these cruise ships. We raised one of those from about 45 feet of water. It took 4 55-gallon drums, which raised about 500 pounds apiece. And that was quite an accomplishment, but we enjoyed that.
I bet.
Talk about the Buffalo, New York shipwreck that you guys, and y'all had a phrase that y'all used for the stuff that you found there. What did they call that?
They called it the coin pile. How did you find out about that, huh? We're trying to keep it a secret, see? No, the Buffalo, one dive we were making around Dunkirk, New York, we were trying to find the deepest spot in Lake Erie, but we met some fellows from Buffalo, and they said, oh, you guys got to come up and dive the coin pile. And, of course, that was an interesting name for it, and it got our interest going right away. So we went up there, and they had an invitational dive, the Buffalo Club, and they would ferry out there to the spot, which was just outside of a break wall, just before the Niagara River. And when they originally found it, the guys from the Buffalo Club were going along, and they found this big anchor, and they decided to raise it. So they got a barge, and they hooked a chain to it, and they were starting to raise it, and there was one of the divers down at the bottom kind of guiding the anchor as they were taking it up. And he said he noticed that there were coins spewing off of the flukes of the anchor. And he comes up and he says, guys, I think we better look down here a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
So He said that when they first found it, you could go along with a 2-pound coffee can and fill it in about a half an hour. There were that many coins laying all over the bottom. And so we went up there and we went out, and sure enough, we found coins, and it's amazing. But you say, well, why didn't you use a metal detector? Well, first of all, metal detectors weren't that popular back then, but you couldn't have used one anyway because there were square nails and all kinds of other junk all over the bottom. It would drive a metal detector crazy. And what you had to do was you had to actually fan through the stuff and uncover the coins. And we came up with large cents from both U.S. and Canada, Indian head pennies, silver dimes, half dimes, 5 cents, 3-cent pieces, and 1 gold dollar. We found foreign coins from France, Germany, Mexico, China. We found tokens from New York. I have over 350 coins out of the area, and none of them are any later than about 1858.
Goodness gracious.
Man, that's a shipwreck right there, buddy. I'd love to find something like that.
The original guy that found it has over 10,000 coins. And we have never been able to identify the wreck. And it's amazing because there were horse bones, there were, I found, clay pipes, I found bottles, tools, hammerheads, silverware, clay pipes, pocket knives, and I found 2 small pistols, one with a cartridge and one with a flintlock. So it was just interesting as the devil, and we used to go up there. It was about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive from Cleveland up to Buffalo, but it was worth it. We'd go up there and spend the weekend, dive 2 days, and come back. And the day I found the gold dollar, the original guy was out there. He was still working it like crazy. And he says, I've only got 2 of those, and you guys come up from Cleveland and you find one of them. So it was quite a coup. It was dated 1854 and looked just like the day it went down. So it was an interesting dive, and we tried like the devil to identify the wreck. I even found luggage tags from a railroad, and I would send copies of it, pictures of it, to the Buffalo Historical Society, and they could not come up with anything. I scanned through the newspapers of Buffalo back then. The only thing that we said, it's one of 2 things. We felt like it was a circus barge, maybe, that would go into New York, and all the immigrants would come to the circus, and they would just give whatever the money they had. And then when they were going west on the lake, something happened where it burned or whatever, because we'd find charred pieces of wood. One of the good things about Lake Erie is it's fresh water. So it doesn't take a lot of toll on things the way salt water does. So it was, it pretty well kept things to a certain extent exactly in their form that they went down. So we just wish we could have identified it. It was really something. And
did any of the salvage efforts, did it make it in a national magazine or anything?
Yeah, it did. Back then, right now you have a magazine that the divers all know called Scuba. But back then it was called Skin Diver Magazine, and hence the name again. And they did put an article in that, and I wish I had it. I had a copy with it in at one time, but I think I don't know if you could go back and find it by searching the internet. But it was all about, showed a fellow with a handful of coins and told all about it. So it wasn't something that they, tried to keep secret that nobody could go to and everything like that. They just figured, they had their, amount of coins that they wanted out of it, and they just, like I say, they held these invitational dives every August, and they would actually bring down a barge, and they'd take the guys out, and you'd take a little float with you, and then they'd come back and pick you up after about a half an hour to an hour. And because there's only 20 feet of water, and after a while I got a second tank and made a set of doubles out of it, and I could stay down for 2 hours in that water.
I'd want more tanks than that, because if the oldest cone or the newest cone that I found was in the 1850s, I'm staying down, ain't you, Jeff?
You darn right, I'm staying down, one way or another.
Yep. Hey, we need to run another commercial. We'll be right back. You know, T-shirts are a perfect way to get your brand recognized, whether you're talking about a business, a club, a sports team, your YouTube channel, or whatever. But you may have asked, where can I get quality, affordable shirts on demand? Well, I'm glad you asked. Relics Radio uses Detectors.com for all of our T-shirts, long sleeve shirts, and hoodies. That's DETECTEES.com. Ken and Mark Guthrie make quality shirts that last, they ship quick, and best of all, they're affordable. So if you need customized apparel, then go to Detectors.com and be sure and tell them that Relics Radio sent you. And by the way, guys, it is getting cooler, and I have used my Relics Radio, wore my Relics Radio hoodie several times this week. You need to get you one of those. They are the perfect weight. They're not too hot. They're not too heavy. They're just perfect. But go to Detectors.com and get you one of those. In this segment here, George, we understand that you moved from Cleveland to Orlando, and we want to talk about that just a little bit. But before I get there, I understand that you and your lovely bride have been married for 61 years. Is that correct?
That's right, and she's put up with me and my diving for all those years.
So there's hope. So there's hope for me then.
Yeah. Matter of fact, we met on a blind date. One of my buddies on the swim team said he had a date with his girl, and he was wanting to know if I wanted to double. And I said, well, I don't know. I'll go along with it. I said, but she's got to be tall because I'm 6'3", and she ended up being 5'2", and we were first date together. We were talking about, what do you like, stuff like that. And she said, what do you do at the pool? Well, I'm on the swim team. And she says, well, do you have any hobbies? And I said, yeah, I'm a skin diver. And she kind of took aback to that and wondered what I really meant. And she says, well, okay, what do you do on the swim team? I said, I'm a breaststroker. I almost blew the date at that point, and my buddy backed me up, and he said, yeah, you have to understand what it's all about, So,
she had this vision of you out there swimming naked and stroking breasts. Yeah, that didn't work out too well, did it?
Yeah. I talked to her about that before this interview, and she said, you're not going to tell him that, are you? And I said, no, I said, that's the way life was. I said, I had to be honest with you.
Yeah. Oh, you told me that the other day whenever I talked to you, and I laughed so hard, and I told you, I said, I don't want to make your wife mad, but that's a priceless story. We had to tell that. But
that was a great one.
Yes, it was. Tell us.
I think I'll make it to 62 years, probably.
Okay. Well, me and my wife are at 40, so we got 21 more years to go to catch up with you guys.
Bless her heart.
Yeah, I know it.
It'll go fast. You won't even notice it. It's a blink of an eye. But,
yeah.
Before I talk about coming down here, I did teach the same company that I bought the Aqualung from. I worked for them part-time because they had no one that knew how to run their diving equipment section where I lived. And then the YMCA came over and said, could you teach a class? And there was no certification yet. So I taught a class for 2 years that I made up. And then they said, well, you have to become certified to be an instructor now. And So I said, okay, and they said, it'll cost you $50. And I said, no, it'll cost you $50 because you're the ones that won't teach. So anyway, they sent me one weekend, and it's kind of like Friday I couldn't even spell instructor, and by Sunday night I was an instructor. Now today, to become an instructor for PADI or NAUI or any of these other organizations, it costs you thousands of dollars and months to qualify. So they've really refined the diving instruction So I encourage anybody that's diving to become certified before you ever go in the water. Yeah. Back then, we didn't know any better. Okay, so now we were married up there, and I worked for a company for ever since we've been married. And now, after about 16 years of diving up there, they wanted to transfer me to Florida to be one of their local representatives. So I said, fine, and I could have had one of 20 different locations in the United States, and I just happened to luck out with Florida. And the guys at work knew I was a diver, and they said, how did you set that up? And I said, I just got the next one that came up, and I said, if I would have tried to set it up, I probably would have ended up in South Dakota. So anyway, I came down, and my son started diving at 13, and incidentally, he found a 5 franc piece on the coin pile that was as large as a silver dollar.
Wow.
And that's a big coin I've found myself. I mean, he just happened to run into it. And it was beautiful. It was all silver. But anyway, we both came down. We both were using double hose regulators because I kind of indoctrinated him on one. And we got down here and went into a dive shop, and guy says, you can't use those out diving with us. And I said, well, why not? He says, because none of us know how to operate one of them. And I said, well, we don't know how to use a single hose regulator either. So I had to go and buy 2 complete single hose regulator outfits so we could dive. And then we got into all kinds of diving down here. I mean, it's kind of like a diver's paradise compared to, you didn't do a lot of spearfishing and photography in Lake Erie. The visibility just wasn't there.
Right.
So we did start diving, and we were still both wreck divers and we covered all the wrecks up and down the East Coast that they sunk as supposedly reefs, but they were also to help the diving industry. So we really didn't like those kind of wrecks because, they were just put out there, dumped, and that was it. There was no history to them. So we liked something that, like for instance, we used to go diving off in North Carolina, and there's wrecks off of there that were sunk by German U-boats during the war. There's even a German U-boat laying out there that thought they were going to hit that and go back, but they decided they're going to have to stay longer because they were on the bottom. And we've dived that. There's 110 feet of water. And there were a lot of wrecks out there. And that's the kind of diving I like. People will ask me, what's your favorite place to go? Well, every diver's got his own likes of diving. Some like a photography, some do fish counting and things like that. Some like cave diving. Everybody said, don't you cave dive? I said, well, I'm not claustrophobic, but there's no wrecks in the caves. And I said, that's what I like to do. And my favorite dive spot is out in the Pacific in an area called Micronesia, and it's called Truck Lagoon. And to this day, it's the best diving for wrecks. Because what happened in 1944, toward the end of the war, there were 65 ships from the Japanese anchored in this lagoon. And we sank all of them in a day-and-a-half raid. And they're all laying on the bottom, tanks strapped to the deck, mines in the holds, parts of Jap Zeros, all kinds of items. And I went out with 2 fellows, both John and Walt, and we spent 2 weeks out there, dove 43 times, on all these wrecks and got some fabulous pictures. So that was my favorite spot. And I've gone to almost all the islands in the Caribbean and down in the ABC Islands. I've been to Australia, the Red Sea, Palau, Yap, the Maldives, the Socorro Islands, most of the springs in Florida, and some other countries, the Cooper River. So I've had a long history of diving, and down here I've dived just about everywhere I want to dive. In fact, people lately have been saying, "Where did you dive recently?" And I said, I haven't dived in over a year. And I said, it isn't because I don't want to. It says, I just can't figure out where to go anymore. It's just that way. I mean, because you go one place here and you see these fish, you go another place and see the same fish. Well, fish don't interest me that much, so unless I can get above a wreck or something like that and really explore it, that's what's holding me up. And then my son, we've been doing most of the diving together. And what we enjoy is what they call liveaboard diving. Now, some people go to an island and they'll dive from shore because they also want to explore the island, what it has to offer and things like that. But we kind of have moved to liveaboard diving, where you go to a location, you get on a boat that has probably about 18 or 20 divers on it, strictly for diving, and it goes out and it doesn't come back for a week to 10 days. And you dive every day. You dive 5 dives a day, including a night dive, and they take you and park you right over the spot, and you go off and do your diving, come right back up, and they help you on with equipment. And so you've got your hotel, you've got your meals, and you've got all that diving, and you can go places that you can't get off of an island. So it's really, and it's not, people think it's really luxurious diving. It is, but it's not any more expensive in most cases than just going to an island and diving from it. Because, like I say, you've got everything there that you would pay piecemeal on an island. So that's kind of the way we look at it. And it's kind of hard to explain to the novice, where Truck Lagoon is and all that stuff like that. But that's what I try to tell people. So
it sounds like a great place, George. What is, you've been diving for a long, long time. What is, tell us a couple of the worst things that you've seen, or have you had any close calls?
Well, I could say probably, I was trying to get a porthole off of a tugboat in Lake Erie. And I was wearing my doubles. It was only 45 feet of water, but I had to go inside the tugboat to start taking, there's 13 bolts around this porthole. And I had 2 other guys with me, and I went through the hatchway, and I just made it through the hatchway with the double tanks. And I went inside and went on the inside of the porthole. There's only one porthole left because a lot of the other divers got it before I got there. So we started taking off the bolts, and I had to hold the boat or turn the bolt from inside while the guy on the outside had another set of wrenches, and he, held the bolt. And we got about, 10 of the bolts off, and the guy on the outside started to run out of air because he only had a single tank. Well, he left to go back up to the boat, and I'm sitting there saying, now how do I get at this thing? Well, the glass in a porthole is about 3/4 inches thick. So I had this big pair of channel locks, and I literally beat the glass out of the porthole so I could reach around and get the bolts. So I was there trying to hold the bolt from the outside as well as the inside, getting it off, and I got the last one out, and I all of a sudden started sucking the air out of the tank. So I knew I still had to go up past that outward opening. So I started over and started going up through the hatch, and my tanks went sideways because we didn't have the type of BCDs they have nowadays, which are really nice, strapped to you and everything like that. All we had was a couple of straps on the tank for your shoulders, and then one around your waist, so the tank could go back and forth, like catacorn across your back. So you had to keep your cool, and I said, I came through here, I know I can get back out again. So I just shifted my tanks, went out, and made it up to the boat. And one of the other guys that had a little bit of air left went back down, and he came up with a porthole. He said, it fell out of the hole just after you left. So I've got the porthole on the wall in my family room.
Wow. Goodness.
Great
and
story.
See, that's what saved you kept your cool. And then, a lot of people, I would have lost it. And, there's tons of people out here, people even listening, they would have lost it then.
Yep.
You panic, and then that's when you get in trouble.
Yep. Great story, I tell you. And yes, you do have to keep you cool. That's one thing, no doubt about it. We need to run another commercial break. We'll be right back. If you want to keep up with what's going on in the metal detecting world, then you need to be a subscriber to American Digger Magazine. Butch and Anita Holcomb are the publishers of the magazine and have won awards for 3 straight years for being the best digger magazine on the market. American Digger Magazine is available in both print and digital formats, so no matter where you live in the world, you can enjoy the latest happenings in the hobby. You can get in touch with American Digger Magazine by going to americandigger.com or give them a call at 770-362-8671. And be sure and tell them that you heard it on Relics Radio. And all of you know that I am the producer of American Digger's Relic Roundup on Monday night with Butch Holcomb and Jeff Lubert. We're on every Monday at 9 o'clock Eastern. So if you're not doing anything on Mondays, well, come over and join us. What we're doing is Writer Spotlight. American Digger Magazine is the premier magazine of metal detecting and treasure hunting, and what we're doing is just taking a writer that's written an article there, and we're kind of highlighting them on the show. So it's some interesting stuff. So go ahead, Jeff, and get us back going.
Well, of course, I found out in the chat that I was in this next issue of American Digger Magazine. Didn't realize it until I was told in the chat, so I hadn't got my issue yet this time, but can't wait to see that. But anyway, George, tell us a little bit. I heard you done a little bit of diving for Mel Fisher. Tell us a few stories about that.
Yeah, I did. Before I get off of the safety thing, I want to emphasize one thing. One of the best things for safety is to have a good buddy. Get used to diving with one particular person. You go on some of these dives and you say, well, I'll pair up with so-and-so. Well, if you don't know each other, you don't know their habits or anything like that. I had a fellow up in Cleveland that I dove with for 16 years, and we could literally talk to each other underwater. And you can do it. It's kind of like being a ventriloquist. And I even swore at him a few times underwater, and he understood me. But when I came down here, my son Gary was my main diving buddy, and we've dived together ever since we've been down here. But when we first came down, my wife and I were sitting on the couch watching a National Geographic special about Mel Fisher, and this was in '75, and it showed how he used these diverters on his props. In other words, when he was searching for the Atocha and the Margarita, he would set these right-angle tubes over the props. They were hinged on the back of the boat, and that would divert the wash from the prop straight down to the bottom. And he would blow a hole in the bottom in about 45 feet of water, and then he would send a couple of divers down. Well, he'd run the engines at full speed, and then he'd back them off to just idle. And then the divers would go down and go right underneath the tubes, and actually the tube would push you down from the flow of the water from the props. and you worked down in this big crater that was down to the bottom, and you'd look for artifacts around the crater. And on the special, they showed these guys working down there, and there was sand blowing all over. You could, barely see the guys. And my wife said, "God, how'd you like to do that?" And I said, "I'd love it. I got to do it." So the next day or two, I called down to Mel Fisher, and Mel Fisher answered the phone. And I said, "Mel, I've been diving 15 years. I don't want any pay. I just want to experience it. I'll help go out with your guys, and I'll do whatever they do, and just to experience." He says, "Yeah." He says, "Come on down." So I went down. I took a 2-week vacation, and I went down there and went out with his son on a boat, and we did some picking around, and we found a few things, some pieces of 8, some cannonballs, things like that. And we came back after a week. You stayed out on the boat for the whole week and had your meals, and you slept on the boat and all that. Then I got back into port, and he had a dive manager that was on vacation, but he came back. And he looked at me and he says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, I called Mel, and he said I should come down." He says, "Oh, he'll hire anybody." I said, "Number one," I said, "he didn't hire me. I'm working for nothing." I said, "Number two, I've been diving for 15 years. I said, some of your guys here are taking their tanks out of the box that they bought it in. I said, now, don't judge me until you watch me dive." So I went out with him, and we dove for a week. And after that week, we found gold. We found, sword handles. We found rifles and all that stuff like that. They were pretty well beat up, but you could still see what they were. We actually found stone cannonballs. And after we got back talking to Fisher, he says, "Yeah, there were only 100 stone cannonballs on the manifest in Seville, and there were 900 iron ones." He says the stone cannonballs, they would shoot those, and they would burst like shrapnel when they would hit, and just like a grenade would do or something like that. So when we get finished with that second week, his dive manager said, he says, "Hey," he says, "you're right." He says, "You're a good diver." He says, "If you want to come back next year," he says, "you come right ahead. In fact," he said, "you can stay at my place over the weekend." So we got a real good friendship started there, and it was a great experience. And when I got home, my wife says, "I didn't think you'd come home." She said, I pictured you being down there for another 2-3 years, and I said, "No." I said, "First of all," I said, it's not exactly everything it's caught up to be." I said, it's grueling. You have to keep searching and searching, and you don't always find anything, just like metal detecting. And I said, besides that, I said, I've got a better job back here than I do down there. So, but it was interesting. I mean, we brought in gold chains. We brought in, the bars of gold and everything, and those bars are stamped with a XX ... which means 23 karat gold, and they were poured in a sand mold. Pardon?
Go ahead.
Sorry,
yeah, go ahead. We got.
I say they were poured in a sand mold, but the assayer would mark them with a number and the Spanish marking, and also what purity they were. So a bar like that probably weighed anywhere from 7 to 10 pounds. So you can figure at 23 karat at today's market of now it's about 1,400 pounds per ounce.
Mm-hmm. Now I could learn how to dive then. I'd be all into it, Seven.
A man wouldn't need but 1 or 2 of those, and he'd quit. But you wouldn't want to, no doubt about that.
No, I'd want another one, then another one.
Yeah. Wow, that is something to be on your resume, though. To have dove with Mel Fisher. probably the most well known, and they searched for those wrecks quite a bit before they actually found them, didn't they, George?
Well, yeah. When he first came here, see, he ran a dive shop out in California, and he heard about the Atocha and the Margarita, and he literally came all the way over here in order to look for it. And he had a fellow doing research in Seville, Spain, where all the records were. And his original finding was that the wreck was supposed to be somewhere between Vero Beach on the west coast of Florida, the east coast of Florida, and Miami. So he went out there and started looking, and all of a sudden he'd run into a wreck, and he found out it wasn't the right one. So he'd file a claim on it, and he'd go down a little bit farther, find another wreck, file another claim with the state so that they would protect it. And what he was running into was a 1715 fleet where 13 ships went down off of the east coast of Florida. All the way, they scattered down from Fort Pierce all the way down to Fort Lauderdale. So all of a sudden, this guy in Spain said, made a slight error. They're off of Key West in the Marquesas. So that's when he switched over and started hunting down there. And now that he's found the main part of the Atocha and the Margarita and pretty well salvaged it, he's still, there's still stuff out there. He's come back with his crew. Of course, Mel has passed away. He's been gone for about, I want to say about 8-10 years now. But his son and his grandson are into it, and they're still working out there off of Fort Pierce and that area, still bringing things in off of those wrecks. So they don't run out. There's always something there.
Yeah.
I was in when we went down to Central Florida Metal Detecting Club hunt this past spring. Me and a buddy of mine, Tim Henderson, and Jimmy Crossbones took us to a spot down there on the Treasure Coast, and we really didn't find anything. Of course, you know how the sand is; the sand has to be washed out before you really find anything. And I come home and I got to doing some research on it, and of course I was I want to move down there. I want to start looking for the 1715 fleet and all this, but I ended up finding a video on YouTube, and it was Mel Fisher's son. This has probably been 10 years ago where he was at, and I got to looking where we were at on the beach, and they had parked their ship, right off the beach, probably not even 100 yards. And right there where we're at, they was finding all kinds of gold coins and silver coins right there where we're at. But of course, we're not allowed to get into the water down there. So, but I was just thinking, all that stuff right there, that close to me, and I couldn't get to it.
So close, but yet so far away. Isn't that the story? The way it normally goes, Jeff.
That sure is.
You have to realize that every time you have a storm, it brings more of that in. It keeps coming in, and that's why the metal detecting club down there, they go out after a storm, and they just even walking along the water's edge, they don't even have to have a metal detector. Sometimes they find them laying on the surface, especially the pieces of 8, the silver ones.
Yeah.
So,
hey, guys, we're going to open up the phone lines now. It's 270-495-0315. Call in and ask George a question here. Very, very interesting guy, and I'll let Jeff continue the show, and I'll watch the board here in case any calls come in.
So when we're down there on the Treasure Coast, I ended up meeting Mel Fisher's granddaughter, and she took us on a tour through the Mel Fisher Museum, and that was pretty neat. And we were trying to find a place to stay that night. Of course, we were going to hunt the Treasure Coast, and she was like, "Well, I've got a apartment right here that no one's staying in." So we got to stay in Mel Fisher's granddaughter's apartment. Of course, it's a VRBO, and of course it was a pretty cool moment. It was. I'll always remember that. So.
And y'all got to see a bunch of that stuff down there, didn't you, Jeff, in the museum?
Oh, no, we sure did. just everything that they had in the Sebastian Beach Museum, they had it right there. And, it was, gold. They had gold bar you could stick your hand in there and hold, and then feel the weight of it and everything, and all kinds of stuff. And then I heard the one at the museum in Miami had one of the gold bars stolen, and somebody, I guess they cut it in half and then got it out that way. And I was watching videos and seeing they had the people on the video that done it, so I don't know if they ever caught them or not.
Was it Tim Henderson?
No, it was I think it was half redneck Mark Hoover. It kind of looked like him and Gale. It had sunglasses. He had sunglasses on, but
well, shortly after I left down there, one of the fellows, in fact, that I was working with on the Margarita and the Toncha, he stole one of those gold bars, and he tried to sell it before he got out of the Keys. I mean, if you really want the gold that bad, why don't you take it home and melt it down, But he actually tried to sell the gold bar to somebody, and they turned him in.
Sometimes criminals are so dumb, aren't they?
Yeah. Or gullible.
Yeah.
Well,
or both.
Not knowing anybody would notice them stamps, the 3 X's and the 3 dots or whatever that was, and then say, hey, I know where that come from.
Yeah, at least file them down or something.
Yeah, you didn't find that in Tennessee nowhere.
Hey, George, does any of your family dive with you now?
My son dives. I have 2 grandsons that dive also. I have my son's son, and also one of my daughter's sons. She's got 3 boys, and the oldest one is the one that got involved. His name is Evan, and the other grandson is named George after me. And I said to my son, nobody names their kid George anymore, but I'm very flattered. And but they both of them taken to the water just like fish. I mean, so that's why the 4 of us have all gone diving on occasion, and that's really nice to be able to see the legacy passed down to them. And they're good divers. I mean, you don't even have to help them on with their equipment. In fact, my son helps me on with my equipment. And I said, you don't have to help me. He says, you helped me when I was little.
Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to work, right there.
I bought him a custom wetsuit when he first started diving at 13. And about the next year, he says, Daddy says, this thing's getting kind of tight on me, because he was growing. And I said, okay. Well, I took it and I sliced it down the back, and I got some extra wetsuit material, and I sewed it into the wetsuit. And then the next year, he started outgrowing it again, so I had to slice it again. And about the 3rd time, I said, your turn. I said, you're going to have to learn how to save money in diving, so here's the needle and thread and the material. I said, but you could take, it was kind of funny, I told him it was like a tree. You could open his suit and tell how old he was. I count pieces that were in it.
Yeah, how many additions had been put in there then?
We put 3 of them in before he wore the suit out. But Jeff, years ago, there wasn't a nylon lining in a suit the way it is today in the wetsuits.
Uh-huh.
And you had to powder the suit on the inside. And then you could slide it on, but you don't dare be wet. I mean, you did it while you were dry, and you could get right into it. And after you got wet, it was a devil. You had to peel it off of yourself. And so we were really fortunate to see the nylon linings come into those suits. Once one of the fellows in our club got real smart, and he coated the inside of his suit with silicone. And man, he could slide right into that thing and get out of it. The only problem is when he tore it, he couldn't repair it, because you used to be able to you had what they call wetsuit cement, and because there was no nylon on either the inside or the outside, but you could cement the 2 edges together if it tore. But once he had that silicone in there, it penetrated. As soon as he would tear it, the silicone would kind of coat those 2 edges, and he could never repair it. So it was a good idea that fizzled out on them.
Yeah, as soon as you tear a hole in it, then it's pretty much done. So.
And they've always said necessity is the mother of invention. So people that were trying to put those suits on and get those suits off said there's got to be a better way. And I'm glad that now that I've got in it that they figured it out, because they're still difficult to get in and get out of. But now it helps you if you do wet them, if you do put them in the water before you get in them, because they do slide on a little bit easier.
Yeah, you're right. And we made a lot of things. Like for instance, I was talking about the BCD before, and when we just had the tanks with the straps on them, we had to figure out some kind of flotation device. And what we did is we went to Army surplus stores, because back in the 50s you still had surplus stores that had stuff that came from the Army during World War II. And we would pick up these Mae Wests that had CO2 cartridges in them. And in fact, that one picture that I sent you shows me putting out a tank, and I'm wearing one of those Mae Wests. And those were great until the actual BCD came out, things like that. But we didn't use anything like that. We made underwater lights. Of course, in freshwater, you can take a regular flashlight down once, because if you left it after that, it would corrode.
Yeah. But
it's not like salt water. So there were a lot of things. We made camera cases out of plexiglass, and I'm trying to think of all the other things. I made a sled that you pull behind the boat that you could plane up and down and go along the bottom. But the only problem was when you've only got about 25 feet visibility in Lake Erie, you didn't go very fast because you never knew what was going to come up. And it was something different,
Yeah.
And so,
George, by the time when you started diving to now, what is the best invention that they've come out for diving, in your opinion?
That's a good question.
Well, I would say the invention of the single hose regulator, because the double hose regulator was to me it was a good breathing regulator, but I had no comparison at that time. But the single hose regulator is a lot less expensive to make to begin with, and I think that's one of the reasons the dive manufacturers went to them. But the other thing is that it was a lot more durable. With those hoses and things like that, you had to be careful. And what would happen is if you took the mouthpiece out of your mouth and you put it above your head or above the regulator in the back, it would become free-flowing. Now, this was good for buddy breathing sometimes, and also for filling up a lift bag if you wanted to recover something. But you had to take those hoses off. I did it every winter. I would take the hoses off and I'd coat it with Listerine and stuff like that to get anything that the water might have left in there over the summer. So it was not as durable as you had. Plus, like I say, with the single hose regulator, you have a lot of ports on it where you can put a gauge on it. You can put the hose to fill up your BC. You can have your your air horn on there, and then your octopus, your other regulator. So that's a great invention too, as far as being able to hand it over to your buddy. I know I worked in a dive shop down here part-time for about 10 years, and they always would teach, that's for that octopus is for your buddy, so in case he runs out of air. I said, no, your buddy's going to grab your regulator out of your mouth, and that's for you. He's done that.
That was one thing that crossed my mind earlier whenever you were talking about, back in the 50s, whenever y'all first started, you didn't have an octopus. You didn't have a spare regulator. There are a lot of things that you guys didn't have, which was really dangerous in a way, wasn't it?
Oh, was it? Oh, never thought about that.
Yeah.
For us that don't know now, what is an octopus for diving?
Well, the octopus is a spare regulator that works just like the main regulator, and it just clips to your belt or your BC, your buoyancy compensator, and you just have it in case of emergency, so you can give it to somebody else in order to buddy breathe. Now, I've had one ever since I've been in Florida. My voice is giving out.
Yeah, we've talked to you too much probably tonight. But hey, guys, I worked hard to get Skype to where we could take calls, and there's nobody even tried to call in tonight. Call in 270-495-0315 while we give George a minute here to get him a drink of water and get his voice back and everything.
Yeah. I was getting over some bronchitis, and I have a cough drop sitting here.
Let's hope I'm not coming down with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, and that changing weather. But no, it's great that it's evolved the way it has, and it's just like me teaching diving back then. I taught, and I would flunk, if you want to use that term. I would flunk a couple of students every year, and I would just tell them, look, this sport is not for you. Because you could tell they didn't feel at home in the water, and they just wouldn't be a benefit to themselves or anyone else. So it's just something you have to, as an instructor, you kind of have to have a sixth sense to know that that person shouldn't really dive. And you hated to tell them, but you just had to say no, because, if you were to pass them, like I think some of these operations that, the dive shops and things like that are a little bit unscrupulous, will pass somebody just to sell them equipment. And to me, that's not the way to go. I mean, you're endangering somebody's life.
And it takes a while to get acclimated to diving. It takes a while to get comfortable, going underwater, because it's not natural for us to go underwater and breathe. And it just takes time to get comfortable with that. And, if I could say anything to anyone is don't do it until you've gone through everything that you need to go through and you feel really, really comfortable. You were talking about things that, inventions that have really turned diving in a better way, and some of them have mentioned it in the chat. But I believe the dive computer has revolutionized diving. I think that the things that dive computers do now, you can even get them where they tell you the pressure that you have in the tank, but more than that, it will tell you on your safety stops and all of that, and you've got alarms if you're coming up too fast, and there's just so many things that a dive computer will do now that takes a lot of the danger out of it that I guess, George, you guys didn't even realize back in the day, did you?
Well, no, we didn't, but like I said before, we were working with the Navy diving tables, whereas you would plan your dive ahead of time, and you would say, well, I plan on, this is 80 feet of water, I plan on going down there, now how long can I stay? And we would calculate that out with the tables.
Right.
But to tell you, when we were in Truck Lagoon, we still didn't have computers, all right? And some of those wrecks were 170 feet, and we were going by the tables. The three of us didn't have computers, but they had computers on the boat, some of the old Edge computers and what they called the Skinny Dipper, which also the Marathon, which were some of the first good diving computers, because there were some computers before then that we called Benzomatics. And anyway, we had a fellow from New York that was on the boat with us, and he rented one of the computers. And he wanted to see the engine room in every wreck that he went down. He would go in before us and come out after us. And we said, there must be something to this dive computer, because we couldn't stay down that long according to the tables. And that's because the tables will tell you you're going to go to 80 feet and you're going to stay there. Well, that's not true in diving. You're going to go down there and say you're looking at a wreck. Well, the top of the wreck in 80 feet might be at 40 feet.
Yeah.
So you're going to look around there a little bit. Well, the computer says, you're not at 80 feet. I'm going to give you some more time. And then you go down a little farther and you get to 80 feet, and it says, okay, I'm going to start taking some time away from you. And then you come up again and you check. So it takes into consideration all of those different levels. And that's what gives you more time. And but it's still, like you say, it's still getting a routine in diving. To say that, boy, I got it all, I know where everything is, you have to even know where everything is on your BC that you're wearing. You have to know where your octopus is. You have to know where your buttons are to inflate and deflate your BC, because you have to keep adjusting to the depth. And so you really have to know where everything is. It's almost like a telephone lineman that goes up on the pole, and he better have everything with him when he gets all the way up there and know where everything is. Kind of like Rambo when he sticks that knife in his BC or his vest and all that stuff, and he's all set to go out there and get the bad guys, you know.
Yeah.
But diving's the same way. You have to have all your equipment with you, and that's what another reason for a buddy, because you both check each other's gear. He looks at you and says, well, this hose doesn't belong here. It should come under your arm instead of on top of it. And, you know, maybe you've got something caught in your belt or something. So you both check each other out before you go in. And that's why I say somebody that you've been diving with for a while is invaluable.
Yeah, and I've got another question, too. Back when you first started, where you had the double hose regulators and everything, those didn't have a purge valve on them. What if that regulator came out of your mouth? How did you clear the water out of it? Did you just exhale the water out?
No, on either side of that mouthpiece, there are non-return valves. In other words, one of those hoses is intake, and the other hose is exhale. Okay. And in the mouth, inside each side of the mouthpiece, on the one that's the intake, it has a one-way valve coming into the mouthpiece, and then it shuts off when you go to exhale. It goes out the other, and it has a one-way valve going out. So if you drop that mouthpiece out of your mouth, the only thing that fills with water is just that immediate mouthpiece, just like it is on a single hose regulator. And then when you blow into it, it blows the water out of that exhale side, and then you inhale from the other side. And then when the water that you've blown out goes up the hose, there's a one-way valve up in that mechanism in the back. I'm losing it again.
Well, you've explained it to me, because it's the same principle with a single hose regulator as it was with the double hose. Just the technology and the way that it's manufactured and made is different. Of course, you do have a purge valve there. And finally, we do have a call coming in. See if I can add him in right here. Tim Henderson, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going, fellas?
Going good.
Going, Tim?
Just
Tim, you're in the
George.
Henderson wetsuits, are you?
I wish. I wish. No, but I've got a few.
You still there, Tim?
Yeah, I'm here. I hear you now.
Okay.
I lost you for a second. I figured I'd help you test out your old software.
It worked. It worked fine. All I did was just merge, and it came on. George, Tim is a diver as well. We hunt together. We've actually, well, not diving, but we've done hookah together. But we're planning on and making plans to do some diving together as the weather changes in the spring. Interesting stuff, isn't it, Tim?
It sure is. I just am amazed listening to George talk about his first dive.
I am too.
It's crazy because when I did my first, when I was getting certified and everything, I couldn't imagine of just doing what he did, just go down to the bottom of the pool and put your stuff on. That's something we had to learn how to do eventually, but right off the bat, and then just jumping off into the lake like that and going down, that's just crazy.
I know,
especially in your underwear.
Well, as long as you don't leave the flap open.
Yeah, well, I think at 40 degrees, once you hit that thermocline, it doesn't really matter. You're pretty much just might as well be naked down there without a wetsuit.
And all the pressure on you, too, as well, But, yeah, when he was talking about the way that they did everything, of course, if you've gone through the course, it was raising red flags every minute to me, the things that they were doing and the way that they were doing them and everything.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And I'm sure that you were thinking the same thing as you were listening.
I was. At least with the wetsuit, if you drink enough water, you got a periodic heater you can use, But in those long johns, you don't.
No, you don't. And for those of you that don't dive, you don't know what we're talking about. But it is something that will work in a wetsuit, but will not work in a dry suit.
No, you got to have a release valve then.
Yep.
I'm sure everybody can use their imagination.
Yeah.
Well, we did have a dry suit back then. There was a fellow that came over from England, and he demonstrated a dry suit. Now, Totes, the same people that make the rubber boots and stuff like that, they made a dry suit back then, but it was of this real thin, almost like inner tube rubber. And they were good for what they were, but they tore so easily, and then you had a whole bunch of water in your suit. But this fellow came over from England, and he had a suit that looked like a material that a line diver has, the hard hat. It was almost like a cloth that was impregnated with rubber, and it was a two-piece suit that the top and bottom merged together, and you rolled it, and then you put on a cummerbund. And he went, in the middle of winter, he went off into Lake Erie in a business suit underneath this thing, and it didn't leak a drop. And we all said, we'll take one, and they were $35. And
wow,
they were the greatest thing, for diving. We dove under the ice with them, and it was just great. But
too, with the dry suit, you can shoot a little air into the suit, and there's a little buffer against the pressure.
Well, see, they didn't have the hose going to the dry suit like they do nowadays either. We had a hood attached to it of a thin rubber, and what we would do is we'd snort some air from our mask overlap the hood, and you would snort some air through your mask, and it would go in and put it in the hood. If you didn't, the first dive we made, we didn't know to do that. And that suit just squeezed the devil out of us when we got down there. And when you come out and you took the suit off, it looked like somebody beat you with a whip because it just pinched you all over. So we soon learned to shoot some air in that way. And, of course, then you had to make sure you got it out, and we'd have to kind of lift our sleeve and take it out of there. If you didn't,
you get upside down in a dry suit.
Well, don't you guys have a good dive spot in Kentucky where they flooded a town? I thought there was one that, in fact, I think one of my buddies from Cleveland dove, and they flooded a town. They built a dam.
Yeah, that's it.
Talking about Del Hollow.
Yeah, that's Del Hollow, and that's Willow Grove, and that's where I've been diving and metal detecting those house sites that are now covered up there. Yeah, and there are just literally hundreds and hundreds of those old house sites, and that's what we're going to do in the spring, ain't we, Tim?
Yeah, I talked to my buddy who certified me about getting with you and you and Ron, and I think I'm going to go back with y'all just to refresh myself because I've just been doing a lot of shallow stuff. I haven't even done any logbooks in a couple of years.
Yeah,
and
I'll set up on the boat, throw dynamite off.
Don't you there's a road that goes right into the water there that you go down in there. I think they had houseboats up there or something like that where they dive from those too.
We take our pontoon out there and just anchor off and go out of them. But I've got a houseboat there on Del Hollow, and I've actually thought about, if you found 2 or 3 right there close together and you wanted to go and dive them and just stay all night, that would be the thing to do. Just go and tie up out there with that. So, it's the possibilities really are endless. I'll tell you.
Yeah,
Del Hollow's a destination for most of the divers around here because of the clarity, the visibility.
Yeah, it is. It's the clearest lake that we have now. It doesn't compare to some of the springs and things down there in Florida that I've seen those guys in, but it does have real good clarity,
No, I was wondering because I know my buddy that dove there said it wasn't too clear, but I was thinking because I do have a Tesoro sand shark, unfortunately Tesoro, but it's a good machine, and it's good to 250 feet, so when should I meet you there?
Anytime you want to come, just as soon as the water and everything warms up, well, plan a trip down here and stay on the boat, and we'll go stay on the houseboat. And I'd love for you to come and all of us go out.
Yeah, I could bring my son, too.
Oh, yeah.
But... yeah, I don't have a dry suit anymore, though.
I don't have a dry suit either, but we'll just go in wetsuits whenever the weather breaks a little bit. I tell you what, George, we're just about out of time. You have been an absolute wonderful guest, a wealth of information, and this was a great show. I knew it was going to be after I talked to you the other day. You just have so much experience. There was one question that I wanted to ask you, and you may have already answered it, but if you could go and dive anywhere in the world, where would you want to go?
Probably back to Truck Lagoon. I really don't. I'd probably go into some of the areas around off of northern Australia, up in that area where there's still a lot of war wrecks and things like that, on the Philippines. But anymore, you really have to pick and choose going to some of these countries because with the unrest that's going on now and everything like that, it isn't like it used to be. No,
that's a good point. I mean, you do. But anyway, you've been a great guest, hadn't he, Jeff?
He sure has, and I've learned a lot, and I've still got a lot to learn on diving. So maybe I can get in there this spring and see if we can find something.
Yeah.
You have to stick with it, though. I mean, it's a great sport, and there's a lot of people into it these days, and I'm glad to see it prosper the way it has.
Yeah. And pioneers like you have contributed so much to the evolution of diving because you guys, you saw the things that needed to be done, and, you took the chances. Now we've got computers, now we've got dry suits, now we've got all of the things that you guys didn't have. And, you were kind of you've lived through the evolution of all of that. And I can only imagine the way that you look at diving and how it's evolved. And it's just amazing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it is. But, it probably isn't the end of it. I mean, with all the advancements they're making in equipment, I think from now on you're going to see even more things taken where you can stay down longer. Well, even with your mixed gases nowadays, and even just putting oxygen into the air, nitrox and stuff like that.
Right.
It does give you more time and everything. So I think we've still just scratched the surface.
Yeah, you're probably right. Well, anyway, thank you so much for spending an hour and a half with us and with all of our guests here, all of our listeners tonight. Jeff, I'll let you say your piece, and then I'll close the show out.
I just want to say thanks, George, for being our guest, and you've been a great guest, and thanks everybody in the chat, and thanks for our caller, Tim Henderson. Yeah, it's nice talking to you again.
Yeah,
good talking to you.
Anyway,
and you guys stay on the line. We will say our goodbyes after I close the show out. But thank everybody for joining us here tonight on Relics Radio, and our guest, George, talking about all of the experience that he had. Just a fabulous show. We're going to be back next week. I know it's Thanksgiving, but yes, we are going to have a show. And we're going to have Miss Barb on, and she's going to be talking about the Christmas giveaway that started last year. She was kind of the boss of all of that, got all of that coordinated and everything, and did a great job. So we thought that it would just be good, it being Thanksgiving, to have her on and talk about that and what she needs so that we can have another successful great Christmas giveaway this year as well. So we will be back next Thursday night at 8 o'clock Eastern right here on Spreaker. Come and join us. Thank you so much for joining us tonight on Relics Radio. We really do appreciate it. Be sure and join us live every Thursday night at 8 o'clock Eastern here on Spreaker, or you can catch the archive show at Relics Radio on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and many other podcast outlets. Relics Radio is also syndicated on the Cutting Edge Radio Network and is broadcast around the world. Please take a minute and hit the like button, and be sure and follow us so you'll get notifications of all of our upcoming broadcasts. You can also find us on YouTube at Diggin' with 7 or Tennessee Jeff, or you can check us out on our Relics Radio Facebook group page or Adventures in History on Facebook. If you'd like to get in touch with us, then send an email to relicsradio@outlook.com. We'd love to hear from you. We hope that you'll join us next Thursday night, and until then, get out there and dig some history.